Ethan had lived in the old Victorian house for just 3 months when he first heard it. A faint scratching sound behind the plaster of his bedroom wall. At first, he blamed rats or mice. The place was nearly 120 years old, after all, with creaky beams and drafty halls. But this scratching was different. It didn't scurry like claws on wood. It was deliberate, rhythmic, as though something inside the walls was trying to trace letters across the boards. He told himself it was nothing, but that night the noise returned, louder this time. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. When Ethan pressed his ear against the wallpaper, his skin prickled. The sound was right there, inches from his head. Yet no movement came from within the room, just a void of silence when he stepped back. Then, just before he tried to go to sleep, he noticed something new. A crack had formed in the wallpaper, a long, jagged tear near the head of his bed. And seeping from the crack was something dark, almost tar-like, staining the fabric in slow, dripping trails. By morning, Ethan tried to convince himself the crack in the wallpaper had always been there, hidden under the dim light. But the dark streaks hadn't been there yesterday. They had spread overnight, staining the pale floral pattern with twisting black lines, like veins pushing through the wall itself. Curiosity gnawed at him. He fetched a box cutter from the kitchen and returned to the bedroom. The house seemed unusually quiet, the kind of heavy silence that pressed against the ears. He slid the blade into the wallpaper and pulled down. The paper peeled away with a wet, sucking sound, as if it had been clinging to something alive beneath it. Behind the wallpaper, he didn't find brick or wooden slats. Instead, there was another layer, something like hardened leather stretched tightly over the studs. Its surface was pocked, uneven, and faintly pulsing, as though it drew breath. Ethan dropped the cutter, stumbling back. For the briefest moment, he swore he heard a muffled whisper from within the wall, the words blurred and strangled by layers of flesh and plaster. Then came the scratching again. Only this time it wasn't faint. It was directly behind the leather-like surface, dragging slowly across, tracing letters he couldn't yet read. Ethan forced himself closer, though his whole body begged him to run. The scratches were clearer now, carving lines into the leathery surface as though something inside the wall was writing from the other side. He leaned in, heart hammering. The lines began to form shapes, letters. Letmeout. The words stretched across the wall, gouged deep into the surface until thin trickles of the same tar-like liquid seeped from the grooves. Ethan staggered back, bile rising in his throat. His logical mind grasped for an explanation, some old prank, maybe a hidden layer of graffiti from decades past. But the words had appeared before his eyes, fresh, wet, impossible to deny. The air in the room grew colder. His breath puffed visibly in the dim light, and the whispering returned. Only now it wasn't muffled. It was behind him. A low voice rasped, so close it brushed the hairs on his neck. "You shouldn't have opened it." He spun around. The room was empty. The door stood ajar, but the hallway beyond was dark. Far darker than it should have been in the middle of the afternoon. The hallway outside Ethan's bedroom was wrong. Shadows swallowed it whole, like someone had draped the house in a shroud. The usual light from the landing window was gone, replaced by a darkness that seemed thick, tangible. He reached for the switch on the wall. Click. Nothing. The bulb overhead stayed dead, its glass bulb faintly reflecting his pale face. The whisper came again, stretched and serpentine, curling from the dark. Closer. Ethan's hand trembled as he fished his phone from his pocket. He thumbed on the flashlight, its pale beam slicing into the void. The hallway was empty, no figures, no movement. But the walls looked different. The floral wallpaper he'd always hated was gone, replaced by the same leathery surface he had uncovered in his bedroom. It stretched down the length of the corridor, veined and wet, shuddering faintly as though it sensed the light. Ethan's throat went dry. He took one step into the hall. The floorboards groaned under his weight, a long, complaining creak. From behind him, in the bedroom, came a sudden slam, his door shutting on its own. The beam of his phone flickered once, twice, then went out. The whisper didn't sound distant anymore. It was right beside him. Ethan's chest tightened as the phone light died, plunging him into suffocating dark. He froze, straining to hear. The house was no longer silent. It was breathing. Slow, labored inhalations reverberated through the walls, followed by a wet exhale that stirred the hairs on his arms. He pressed himself against the wall, but recoiled instantly. The leathery surface was warm and slick beneath his palm, and it twitched at his touch like muscle under skin. A sudden vibration shivered through the floorboards, rattling a framed photo off the hallway wall. It landed at his feet. Ethan aimed the phone blindly, mashing the power button until the flashlight sputtered weakly back to life. He lifted the frame. The glass had cracked across the image of his house, the house he now stood in, but something was wrong with the photo. The windows in the picture weren't blank panes of glass. Faces were pressed against them. Dozens of pale, screaming faces, mouths stretched wide in frozen terror. Ethan dropped the frame and staggered backward. His foot caught on something soft, and he looked down. A hand, pale, child-sized, and impossibly real, was reaching up through the crack between the boards, clutching his ankle. Ethan yanked his foot free, stumbling back as the hand retreated, slipping silently into the floorboards. His heart thudded in his chest like a hammer striking metal. The hallway groaned and shivered as if the house itself were waking. From somewhere above, a series of scratches echoed, fast, frantic, like fingernails raking across the ceiling. Then came a whisper, impossibly close, right in his ear. "Stay." He spun around. The walls seemed to pulse, veins of black liquid writhing and spreading as though they were alive. Ethan backed toward the staircase, the house twisting subtly around him. The hallway stretched longer than it should, the end vanishing into inky darkness. From the darkness, another hand appeared. This one was larger, gnarled, with blackened fingers curling toward him. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over the frame of a fallen painting. He crashed to the floor, and the hand grazed his shoulder. Cold, clammy, and impossibly strong. Scratches erupted all around him now, like a chorus of nails across the walls, floors, and ceiling, forming words he couldn't yet read. The house was speaking, or screaming, and it wanted something from him. Ethan scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the staircase, but the house refused to cooperate. The hallway stretched endlessly, twisting at impossible angles. Each step felt heavier, as though the floor itself was trying to swallow him. The whispering multiplied, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. "Closer, stay. Never leave, join us." Panicked, Ethan yanked open a door to what should have been the study. Instead of books and furniture, he found another hallway, identical to the one he had just fled. The walls pulsated, slick and warm, black veins writhing like serpents. He ran, trying door after door, only to find each room a variation of the same endless corridor. Sometimes the ceiling dipped low, threatening to crush him. Sometimes the floor sagged as though he were running through water. And everywhere the scratching followed him. Not random now, it was intentional, spelling out words he could barely comprehend. "We're inside you," Ethan screamed, spinning in a circle. The air was thick with a sour, metallic stench. Shadows writhed in corners, never fully formed, always just out of reach. He stumbled into a door at the end of one corridor, hoping it led to safety, but as he pushed it open, the darkness on the other side surged forward, swallowing him whole. Ethan fell forward into the darkness, hitting the floor with a thud. Pain shot up his arm, but he barely registered it. The darkness was not empty. It was alive. It pressed against his skin like a thick, cold liquid, seeping into his pores, making his vision swim. A voice, sharper now, hissed directly into his mind. "You opened the door. Now you belong." He struggled to rise, but the floor beneath him was no longer solid. It rippled like black water, and grotesque faces surfaced, screaming silently, eyes wide and pleading. One reached up, fingers clawing at his ankles, then another, then dozens, until the surface of the darkness writhed with countless hands. Ethan's flashlight flickered back to life, revealing a narrow path through the writhing abyss. Something was waiting at the end. A shape hunched and misshapen, limbs bent at impossible angles, its skin the same dark, leathery texture he had found in the walls. It raised a hand toward him, and he saw, in a brief flash, hundreds of faces pressed into its torso, mouths screaming silently, eyes wild with terror. The scratching intensified around him, all over his body, all inside his skull. The house itself was alive, demanding payment for the curiosity he had shown. Ethan froze, trembling, as the twisted figure began to move toward him. Its joints bent in impossible angles, each step accompanied by a wet, tearing sound, like fabric being ripped from flesh. Then it spoke, not with words, but with a chorus of voices all at once. Dozens of whispered screams, layered together, forming a single horrifying sentence. "You saw us. You woke us. Now you are ours." The ground beneath Ethan quivered, forcing him to his knees. The walls of the corridor pulsed, writhing like living things, veins thick with dark liquid expanding and contracting as if breathing. A hand, elongated and slick, shot out from the figure, grazing his shoulder. Pain exploded through him, sharp and sudden. But the worst was inside his mind. Visions of hundreds of people trapped behind layers of flesh and plaster, their terror feeding the house, their whispers merging into a growing, maddening chorus. Ethan tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat. The figure advanced, dragging more of the walls with it as though the house itself were crawling forward, reshaping itself around him. He realized then that he wasn't just inside the house anymore. The house was inside him. Ethan fell backward as the figure reached for him. The floor beneath him split open, revealing a cavity lined with the same leathery walls he had seen before, pulsating and twitching as if alive. He tumbled into it, landing in darkness that smelled of decay and iron. The scratching was everywhere now. Under his hands, beneath his feet, inside his skull. He could feel tiny movements within the walls around him, like fingers sliding just beneath the surface, pressing against him, testing him. He turned his head and saw faces, dozens of them, pale, distorted, pressed against the walls from the other side. Their mouths opened silently in eternal screams, eyes pleading. One even mouthed words he could feel more than hear. "Don't join us." But the house's power was absolute. The walls pulsed, contracting and expanding, pushing him deeper into the cavity. The tar-like liquid seeped from the seams, coating his arms and legs, sticky and hot, crawling over his skin as if trying to pull him into the walls themselves. And then he heard it, the beating of a heart, not his own. Something enormous, somewhere beneath the house, alive, thrumming through the floor, calling to him. The whispering was louder than ever, now an overwhelming chorus of hundreds of voices. "Stay, stay, stay." Ethan realized he had no choice. The house wouldn't let him leave. Not ever. Ethan crawled through the blackened cavity, slipping over patches of the slick, tar-like substance. Every instinct screamed for him to stop, to turn back. But the walls seemed to close in, guiding him forward. At the end of the tunnel, he stumbled into a room he hadn't known existed. The walls were bare except for a series of crude symbols carved deep into the leather-like surface. In the center of the room was a pit filled with the same writhing black liquid. The shadows above it formed shapes. People trapped in endless torment, suspended just beneath the surface, their silent screams stretching upward like smoke. A voice, louder and older than any he had heard, reverberated through the room. "We built this place. Every brick, every wall, every whisper. It is ours. And now you belong." Ethan's stomach turned. The house hadn't been built by men. It had been grown, shaped from some ancient, living entity that consumed the souls of those foolish enough to inhabit it. Every tenant, every curious intruder, became part of its walls, its floors, its heartbeat. He backed away, but the walls pulsed, tendrils of dark liquid reaching for him like fingers. The scratching intensified, forming letters on the walls around him. "You are next." Ethan realized with horror that he was standing at the heart of the house, and if he wanted to survive, he would have to escape the very thing that had once been his home. Ethan stumbled backward, heart pounding, but the room shifted around him. The floor rippled like liquid, and the walls bent inward, narrowing the space. Every exit he tried led only to more corridors, more walls slick with black veins and twitching like living flesh. He tried to climb, to leap, to smash through the leathery walls, but each strike only sent ripples across the surface, as if the house were mocking him. The voices grew louder, overlapping in chaotic harmony. Closer, closer, closer. In a sudden burst of panic, Ethan remembered the small attic window he had glimpsed months ago. He ran blindly, guided only by instinct. The corridors twisted unnaturally, lengths stretching and shortening as if the house were alive, playing with him. Scratches formed letters as he ran. "You can't leave." Suddenly, the walls erupted in motion. Faces pressed outward, mouths wide, eyes frantic. Tendrils of the dark liquid shot toward him, gripping at his legs, pulling him down. Ethan kicked, screamed, and tore free, stumbling into a staircase that hadn't existed before. The staircase led upward, toward a faint glow of natural light. His pulse surged with hope. Maybe he could reach the attic window and escape. But with each step, the house fought harder, the walls breathing, stretching, and clawing at him like a predator. The light above flickered, distant and fleeting, like a promise he wasn't sure he deserved. Ethan lunged up the final stairs, lungs burning, limbs trembling. The faint glow grew brighter as he neared the attic, a small window framed by peeling paint and warped wood. Hope surged, he could taste freedom. But the house had one last trick. The walls of the stairwell bent and pulsed, veins of black liquid writhing like snakes. The scratching was deafening now, pounding directly in his skull. The voices screamed in unison. "Stay with us." He reached the top, slammed his shoulder against the attic door, and yanked it open. The window was there, just as he remembered, but the view beyond it was wrong. The world outside was dark and shifting, like smoke. The moon above swirled unnaturally, and shadows danced with impossible geometry. Something moved behind the window. Faces, countless faces, pressed against the glass, staring at him with empty, pleading eyes. Hands scraped against the pane, leaving streaks of the same black liquid that had consumed the walls. Ethan's fingers gripped the window frame. He knew if he climbed out, he might escape the house, but what awaited outside was as alien and terrifying as the walls themselves. The attic began to shake violently, and the house's heartbeat pounded beneath his feet. The figure he had seen before, the twisted amalgamation of bodies, emerged from the shadows behind him, stretching impossibly, arms reaching, whispering, scratching, demanding, "You belong." Ethan's hands slid over the cold window frame as the house behind him convulsed, walls pulsing and veins of black liquid surging toward him. The figure loomed closer, its hundreds of faces screaming silently, limbs twisting in impossible angles. He realized there was only one choice. Leap. Jump into the unknown, the dark swirling world outside, or be swallowed entirely by the living house, becoming part of its walls forever. His mind screamed, "No, stay." But the voices in the walls screamed louder. "Stay with us. Join us. Forever." Summoning every ounce of strength, Ethan swung his legs over the sill. The window groaned, the frame straining, but it held for now. He jumped. The world outside was black, shifting, disorienting. Gravity felt wrong, and the air was thick and viscous, like he was swimming through shadows. The house's heartbeat followed him, pounding in his chest as if it had extended its reach beyond its walls. Hands reached out from the darkness, faces pressed against the void, whispering, clawing. But Ethan pushed forward, propelled by sheer terror and instinct. Ethan tumbled through the black void, limbs flailing, heart hammering like a drum. The oppressive weight of the house's presence pressed against him from every side, its whispers clawing at his mind. Then suddenly he landed, Not on solid ground, but in a street that looked familiar, his neighborhood but twisted. Everything was slightly off. Shadows too long, houses too crooked, windows staring like eyes. The world beyond the house was real, but corrupted, like a reflection seen through water. He scrambled upright, gasping. Behind him, the void receded, but he could feel it watching, remembering. Somewhere in the distance, a low, wet thud echoed heartbeat-like, and the whisper reached his ears once more, faint but unmistakable. "We know where you are. We will wait." Ethan ran, not toward hope, not toward escape, but simply away. He didn't look back. He didn't stop. The house had let him go, for now, but he understood the truth. It would never forget him. Its walls, its whispers, its dark, writhing heart would follow, lurking in the corners of his vision, in the walls of every house, in the shadows of every room he entered. And deep down, he knew one day it would come again. The scratching had not ended.